It started out as a way to escape. Life in the city had been too loud lately. Too many people, too much traffic, too many things that kept my brain running at night when I just wanted silence. I thought a few days in a quiet cabin would help. No phones, no noise, just the sound of wind in the trees and maybe a creek nearby. I booked a small rental deep in the mountains. The listing was simple: a wooden cabin with one bedroom, a bathroom, a small kitchen, and a front porch that faced a wide stretch of forest. It was almost 2 hours from the nearest town, up a narrow, winding road that hadn't seen maintenance in what looked like years. I had to drive slow just to avoid scraping the bottom of my car on the rocks and potholes. I arrived late in the afternoon. The sky was already turning orange when I pulled up to the cabin. It sat on a flat patch of land, surrounded by pine trees that towered over the roof. There were no other houses in sight, no power lines either. The place ran on a generator and a water tank, both of which were around back. It felt isolated in the way I wanted, just me and nature. The first night passed quietly. I made some instant noodles on the old gas stove, sat out on the porch as the sun went down, and listened to the sound of crickets. No cars, no neighbors, just the wind pushing through the trees. I felt calm for the first time in weeks. I slept well, maybe too well. When I woke up the next morning, it was nearly 10 a.m., and the light coming through the windows was already bright. I stretched, made a cup of coffee using the small percolator left in the cabinet, and walked outside. I had planned to hike a bit that day, maybe explore the trails I saw marked on a paper map left on the counter. But something strange caught my eye right away. There were boot prints in the dirt near the side of the cabin. Not mine. I had only walked from the car to the porch the day before, and I hadn't circled the cabin at all. These prints were fresh. I bent down and looked closer. They were large, maybe size 11 or 12, and deep in the soil as if whoever made them had been carrying something heavy. The tracks led from the edge of the woods straight to the side wall of the cabin, then stopped. I stood up slowly. My mind told me it was probably a ranger or maybe the property owner checking on things. But the fact that I hadn't heard anything, and that the tracks didn't lead away from the cabin, only toward it, bothered me. Still, I tried not to overthink it. I spent the rest of the morning walking a nearby trail that looped around a shallow ravine. The silence was peaceful, and I tried to let it wash over me. When I got back to the cabin around 3 p.m., the tracks had mostly faded, thanks to a light wind picking up. I convinced myself it was nothing, but that night I started hearing things. It began with a scraping sound outside the bedroom wall, a long, slow drag, like someone was running a branch or a stick across the wood. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, and held my breath. The sound came again, a drag, then silence. I told myself it was just the wind. The cabin was old, the trees were close, maybe something had brushed against the side. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I checked around the cabin. I didn't see anything unusual. No new prints, no marks on the wall. The air felt colder, though. Not just weather cold, something else. Heavier somehow, like something was watching me. Still, I stayed. I had 2 more nights left, and I wasn't going to waste the money I'd spent. I went for another hike, shorter this time. I kept looking over my shoulder without meaning to. I felt like someone was behind me, even though the trail was completely empty. That evening, I sat on the porch as usual, but I couldn't relax. The wind had died down and everything felt too still. No insects, no animal sounds, the kind of silence that doesn't feel right. As the sky darkened, I went inside and locked the door. Around midnight, I woke up to a sound that froze every part of me. The front door handle was moving. I was sure of it. I sat up in bed, listening. First, it was soft, just a slow click. Then more pressure, like someone was pushing on it, gently trying to see if it was locked. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. The sound lasted for maybe 20 seconds, then stopped. I waited another hour in silence before I got up and walked quietly to the front of the cabin. I peeked through the edge of the curtain. Nothing. But the next morning, I found something that made my stomach drop. A small piece of duct tape was stuck to the bottom of the doorframe. It hadn't been there before. It was placed so neatly, so deliberately, that I knew it was no accident. And then I saw it. A tiny piece of folded paper taped behind it. My fingers trembled as I pulled it off and opened it. It was blank, just a folded square of paper. No writing, no symbols, just nothing. But the act of leaving it, whoever did that, meant they wanted me to see it. That was the message. I packed my bags immediately. I wasn't supposed to leave until the next day, but I wasn't staying another night. I threw everything into my car and started the engine. I didn't even bother cleaning up. As I drove down the long, bumpy road, I kept checking my mirrors. I half expected to see someone step out of the woods or a truck start following me. But I made it back to town without incident. I thought that was the end of it. I got back to the city, back to my job, and tried to forget the whole thing. Maybe it was some kind of twisted prank. Maybe someone had seen me arrive and decided to mess with me. People are weird. But then, a week later, something else happened. I was at home, sitting on my couch, watching TV. My apartment's on the 3rd floor, in a fairly secure building. I got up to grab a drink, and when I came back, I noticed something on the floor near my front door. A small piece of duct tape, and next to it, a folded blank paper, just like the one at the cabin. I didn't hear anyone come in. The locks were fine. No signs of a break-in. I didn't understand how it got there, but I knew what it meant. Whoever had been at that cabin had followed me home. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with the lights on, a kitchen knife next to me. Nothing happened, but the fear was worse than anything actually happening. Not knowing if someone was outside, not knowing what they wanted, just the silent, patient waiting of it all. I installed cameras the next day. Doorbell camera, hallway camera, even one pointing out my window. Nothing turned up. For weeks, everything was quiet again. I started to relax. I thought maybe I'd imagined it or someone was pulling a one-time scare. But it didn't stop. Once every few weeks, I'd find the same thing. A folded blank paper, somewhere in my apartment. Sometimes in the mailbox. Sometimes under the doormat. Once inside my car. No signs of entry. No clues. No fingerprints. Just the message that someone was still watching. It's been almost 8 months now. I moved to a new place. Different city, different state. Didn't tell anyone where I was going. Changed my phone, deleted old emails, wiped everything. But 2 nights ago, I got back to my new apartment after work. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Right there, sitting on the counter, was a folded square of paper. Blank. No tape this time. No damage to the lock. Just placed there carefully, like always. I don't know who it is or what they want. I've stopped reporting it. Police don't care without real evidence. They think I'm just paranoid or making it up. I've stopped sleeping properly. I've stopped feeling safe anywhere. I've learned to live with the fear. But I know one thing for sure. It all started at that cabin. And I should have left the second I saw those footprints. I'm not the kind of guy who normally takes big risks. I like steady work, a quiet routine, and being in control. But early last year, I hit a point where I felt like I had to get away from everything: work, noise, traffic, people. I had just ended a long relationship, and I was tired of city life. I wanted quiet, space, a place where I could breathe again. So when I saw an ad online for a small off-grid cabin in the mountains for a low price, I jumped on it. The photos looked great: wooden walls, big windows, a stone fireplace. The listing said it was tucked away near a trail network, backed up against forest land, and totally private. No nearby neighbors, no cell service. Felt like exactly what I needed. I didn't visit it in person before buying it. That was my first mistake. The seller seemed legit and told me everything was in good shape. The photos were clear. The description was detailed. I had the money saved up, and after a few weeks of emailing back and forth, I bought it outright. 2 months later, I drove out there with a truck full of supplies, planning to spend my first week alone. I told my family and a couple of friends where I'd be, gave them a GPS pin of the location, and promised to check in once I got back into town. Took me nearly 7 hours to get there from the city. I followed a long dirt road that turned into a gravel path, then a narrow track through the trees. There were no signs, no fences, no gates. It felt like I was driving deeper and deeper into nowhere. I finally reached the clearing where the cabin sat. It looked a bit more worn than in the photos, older, like it hadn't been maintained in a while, but it was still standing strong. A small wooden porch, 2 narrow windows on the front, and a metal chimney poking out of the roof. There was a tiny tool shed nearby and an old generator sitting next to it, half covered in a tarp. I unpacked and walked through the cabin. Inside was one main room with a kitchen on the left and a sitting area near the fireplace. There was a narrow hallway in the back that led to a bathroom and a small bedroom. No fancy furniture, just a couch, a table, and a bed frame with a thin mattress. It smelled old, dusty, slightly musty, like it had been closed up for a while. I opened the windows to air it out. It was dead quiet. No birds, no wind, just trees in every direction and the soft creak of the wooden floor under my boots. That first night was peaceful. I lit a fire in the fireplace and cooked a simple dinner on a camping stove. I had brought a big cooler full of food since the cabin had no fridge, and I stacked some bottled water inside by the wall. I used the solar-powered lanterns I brought since I wasn't sure how well the generator worked. I didn't bother turning it on yet. It got dark quickly, the kind of dark you forget exists when you live in the city. Thick, total darkness, the kind that eats up your flashlight beam. I stayed inside and tried to read, but I was too tired from the drive. I went to bed early. That first night, I woke up once. I thought I heard footsteps outside. It was just a few crunches, like someone stepping on gravel or dry pine needles. Slow, spaced apart, then silence. I sat up and listened for maybe 5 minutes, but nothing else happened. I told myself it was probably an animal, deer, maybe a raccoon, and went back to sleep. The next morning, I walked the perimeter of the clearing. I didn't see any footprints. But then again, the ground was hard-packed dirt with pine needles and dead leaves. Nothing left a clear mark. Still, it stayed in my head. That day, I spent most of the time chopping firewood and organizing the cabin. I tried starting the generator in the afternoon, just to see if it still worked. After a few pulls, it fired up. The lights in the cabin flickered once and stayed on. I shut it off again to save fuel. It was on the second night that things really started to feel wrong. I woke up around 2 or 3 in the morning to a loud banging sound. It came from the front of the cabin, maybe the porch or the wall. A hard thud, then another, then nothing. I grabbed my flashlight and walked slowly to the front window. I didn't see anything at first, but the porch was dimly lit by moonlight. I opened the front door and stepped out. It was cold. I held the flashlight in one hand and scanned the clearing. Still nothing. No movement. I walked a few feet into the yard and turned in a full circle. That's when I noticed something strange. The tarp that had been covering the generator was lying on the ground a few feet away. It hadn't been windy. The bungee cords were snapped. Not untied, snapped clean through. That didn't make sense to me. Maybe it had been more worn than I thought. I picked up the tarp and tossed it back over the generator, then went back inside. I locked the door this time. The rest of the night, I kept hearing things. Not loud, not frequent, but soft noises, like crunching footsteps, a faint scrape, a knock. Sometimes it was so faint I thought I imagined it. But every time I held my breath to listen, the sound would stop. By the time morning came, I hadn't really slept. I stepped outside as soon as it was light and checked the area again. Still no footprints, no broken branches, but the door to the shed was cracked open. I was sure I had latched it the day before. Inside the shed, nothing seemed missing or disturbed, but I felt uneasy, like someone had been in there. I started keeping the axe inside the cabin after that. Later that day, I hiked up the slope behind the cabin to get a better view. I figured maybe I could find a cell signal. I brought my phone and climbed for about 20 minutes until I reached a rocky outcrop. From there, I could see out across the forested valley. Still no signal. But from that height, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. In the distance, near a bend in the trees, maybe 300 or 400 yards away, I saw something that looked like an old campsite. A ring of blackened stones, maybe some stacked logs. I used my phone's zoom to get a better look, but it was hard to tell. I decided to go check it out. It took me almost an hour to bushwhack my way down there. There was no trail, just thick trees and underbrush. When I finally reached it, I saw that it was, in fact, a campsite, but not a current one. The fire pit was full of ash. The logs around it were weathered and dark, like they'd been sitting for years. Some rusted cans were buried under leaves nearby. Old bones too, animal bones, I assumed. Someone had lived out here at some point. What really bothered me, though, was that one of the logs had deep cuts in it. Knife marks, like someone had been whittling or carving obsessively. The bark was stripped away, and the wood underneath was hacked up in dozens of overlapping slashes. I didn't stay long. That night, I made sure everything was locked up. I kept the axe next to the bed and barely slept. I didn't hear anything that night, but the silence felt heavier, like something was waiting. On the fourth morning, I walked the edge of the clearing again. I had this nagging feeling, like someone had been watching the cabin. Then I found it. A small piece of white fabric caught on a branch, like a strip torn from a t-shirt or a rag. It was tangled about shoulder height, like someone had brushed past it recently. I hadn't worn anything white since I got there. I stood still for a long time, just staring into the woods. Everything was still, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been out there watching me, maybe even walking through the trees at night. I decided I wouldn't stay the full week. I packed everything back into the truck by noon. I was going to sleep one last night, then leave first thing in the morning. That night, I turned the generator on and left a few lights glowing inside. I wanted the place lit up. I kept the axe with me and tried to stay awake. Around 1:30 a.m., the generator cut out, just died. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped out onto the porch, and froze. There was someone standing at the tree line. I couldn't see their face, but I could make out the shape. Still, silent, just watching. They didn't move when I pointed the light at them. I backed into the cabin and locked the door. I didn't sleep. I didn't even sit down. I stood with the axe in my hand until the sun came up. By daylight, the person was gone. But when I walked out to where they had stood, I saw prints in the dirt. Bare feet, deep and wide. Not animal. That was it for me. I left that morning without breakfast. Drove the full 7 hours back to the city without stopping once. Later, I hired a local company to go inspect the cabin and get it ready for resale. When they got there, they sent me photos. There were scratches on the back door. Long, jagged ones like someone had dragged a knife or a tool down it. Inside the shed, they found more stripped logs and cut marks. They also found a pile of animal bones stacked neatly in one corner. Bones that hadn't been there when I left. I sold the cabin at a loss and never went back. Whatever was out there, whoever was living in those woods, they weren't just passing through. They were watching, waiting, and I got out just in time. I needed a break from everything. Work had been draining me, and my phone was constantly buzzing with things I didn't want to deal with. I wasn't looking for anything fancy, just peace. So I rented a remote cabin in the mountains, a few hours outside of town. It wasn't advertised much, but it was cheap and far from everything, and that's all I cared about. I packed some supplies, enough for a week, and drove out early on a Monday morning. The road was rough and narrow. After the last town, there were no gas stations, no stores, no signs of other people. My cell signal dropped as the dirt road twisted deeper into the forest. I didn't mind. That was the point. The cabin appeared at the end of a narrow trail, hidden by tall trees and surrounded by thick brush. It looked old but solid. A small porch, one window on each side, and a chimney sticking out of the roof. It was quiet, almost too quiet. Inside, the place was simple. A single bed with a lumpy mattress, a small kitchen area with a propane stove, and a fireplace made of old stone. There was a bathroom too, with a water tank and a weak little shower. No electricity, just a couple of battery-powered lanterns and a box of candles. I dropped my bag, took a long breath, and felt something loosen in my chest. For the first time in a while, I felt like I could breathe. The first couple of days were calm. I went for short walks, read an old book I found on a shelf, cooked basic meals, and sat outside on the porch for hours just listening to the wind in the trees. At night, I'd light a candle, sit by the fireplace, and let my thoughts settle. It was exactly what I needed. I started sleeping better, and my mind began to clear. I didn't think about work. I didn't think about anything, just quiet. On the third night, I heard something. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when a thud came from outside. Not loud, but heavy, like a branch falling. I sat up, heart kicking a little. I waited. Another thud, then silence. I got up and walked to the window. It was pitch black outside, darker than I'd ever seen. The trees swallowed the moonlight. I stood there for a while, staring into nothing before going back to bed. The next morning, I went outside to check. Nothing looked different. No fallen branches, no prints in the dirt. Nothing. Maybe a raccoon had knocked something over. I let it go. That afternoon, I went further into the woods than I had before. I brought a small backpack with water and snacks and followed a narrow game trail. It twisted through the trees and rose up a gentle slope. I kept walking, not really paying attention to where I was going. Eventually, I reached a small clearing with a few old stumps and some moss-covered rocks. I sat there, drank some water, and rested. On the way back, I noticed something odd. About halfway back to the cabin, the trail forked, but I didn't remember it splitting when I came through. I stood there, trying to remember. The left path looked more worn, so I took it. After a few minutes, I realized I wasn't heading in the right direction. The trees didn't look familiar, and I didn't recognize any of the landmarks. I backtracked and took the right fork instead. After another 10 minutes, I finally spotted the roof of the cabin through the trees. When I got back, the front door was open. I froze. I was sure I had locked it. I always did. I stood there, not moving, listening. Nothing. I slowly stepped onto the porch and peeked inside. Everything looked the same. My bag was still on the table, the lantern was still in the corner. Nothing seemed touched. I walked in carefully, checked each room. Empty. I closed the door and locked it again, this time double-checking. That night, the forest felt different. The wind had died down and everything was still. No rustling leaves, no bird calls, not even the distant snap of branches. Just silence. I lit a candle and sat by the fireplace, listening. At some point, I heard soft crunching outside. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. My skin tightened, and I held my breath. I stared at the door, not blinking. The steps circled the cabin once, then stopped. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I found a single footprint in the dirt near the porch. Not an animal. A boot. Human. I hadn't seen anyone since I left town. No other cabins, no campsites, no hikers. Nothing. I stared at it for a long time. The print was deep, clear. Someone had been there. I walked the perimeter of the cabin but didn't find anything else. I told myself maybe it was old. Maybe I had missed it before. But I didn't believe that. I thought about leaving, packing up and driving back to town. But I had come out here to escape, and I didn't want to give that up over something that might have been nothing. I decided to stay one more night. If anything else happened, I'd leave in the morning. That evening, I didn't go outside. I cooked, ate quickly, and sat inside with both lanterns on. I kept the door locked, checked the windows. Every shadow outside looked like something. The wind had picked up again, brushing against the walls like hands. Around midnight, I heard something near the back wall, a scraping sound, not loud but steady. I sat up, heart pounding, and listened. It stopped, then a tap, just one, like a knock. I grabbed the heavy flashlight from the shelf and crept to the back window. I turned it on and aimed it outside. The beam caught nothing, just trees and brush. But something moved. I saw the leaves shake, not from wind, from something moving away. I backed up and locked the window. I didn't sleep that night either. The next morning, I made my decision. I packed my bag and loaded the car. As I was locking the cabin, I noticed something carved into the porch post. It hadn't been there before, just 3 vertical lines scratched deep into the wood. I didn't know what they meant, but they made my stomach turn. I drove fast, pushing the car harder than I should have. The dirt road bounced the tires and scraped the undercarriage, but I didn't care. I didn't stop until I was back on the main road, with cell signal and traffic and noise. I pulled into a gas station and sat there for a long time. I never found out who it was. No one followed me. Nothing happened after I got back. But the whole thing stayed with me. The sound of those footsteps, that single footprint, the scrape and the tap on the wall. Someone was out there watching, maybe just curious, maybe not. I'll never know. But I never went back to that cabin. I never rented anything that remote again. I still like the idea of peace and quiet. But now I know there's a difference between being alone and being isolated. One feels good, the other feels like a trap. And I'll never forget that sound, that slow, steady crunch of footsteps in the dark. I had always liked being alone in the woods. Something about the silence, the stillness of the trees, and the soft sound of wind brushing against the pine needles always helped me think clearly. After years of city noise, I needed a break. So when I found an old cabin listed for rent deep in the northern woods of Montana, I didn't think twice. I packed my bags, loaded up my Jeep, and drove out with plans to spend 10 days completely off-grid. The cabin was simple. One room with a wood stove, a cot, a small table, and a broken-down rocking chair. There was no plumbing, no electricity, just a hand pump outside for water and an outhouse about 20 yards back in the trees. The place sat in a small clearing surrounded by tall, thick woods in every direction. The closest town was about an hour's drive. I arrived late afternoon and unpacked quickly. The sun was dropping fast, and I didn't want to be outside in the dark. I stacked some firewood near the stove, lit a few candles, and made a simple meal of canned chili on my little camp stove. That night, it was quiet, too quiet. I had expected the usual nighttime sounds, crickets, owls, maybe even coyotes in the distance. But there was nothing, just complete stillness. The next morning, I went for a short walk around the property. The trees were dense and close together. The deeper I went, the darker it got. The sky was blue, but under the canopy, it always looked like evening. I didn't go far, maybe half a mile, and then turned back. Something about the woods made me uneasy, like I was being watched, even though I hadn't seen or heard anything alive. Back at the cabin, I spent most of the day chopping wood, reading, and keeping the fire going. As night fell, I felt that strange quiet again. I tried to ignore it and went to bed early, but I woke up around 3 a.m. It was still dark, but I could hear a sound now, a faint rustling. Not like wind through the trees, more like something moving through the brush slowly. I sat up on the cot, listening. It lasted about a minute, then stopped. I told myself it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a fox. I had no reason to think otherwise. Still, I didn't fall back asleep. The following days went by slowly. I kept myself busy during the day, but every night, like clockwork, I would wake up around the same time. And each time, the rustling would start. Sometimes it sounded closer, other times, farther away. I started to take note of how long it lasted, which direction it came from, and whether it circled the cabin. It wasn't until the 5th night that I started to get truly worried. That night, the rustling came right up to the cabin wall. I could hear something brushing against the outside boards, slow and steady. I froze. I didn't move, didn't even breathe too loud. The sound circled the cabin once, maybe twice, then stopped. I didn't sleep at all after that. I kept the hatchet I had used for chopping wood close to my bed. The next morning, I checked outside. There were no tracks. The ground was soft in some places from melted snow, but nothing looked disturbed. I started to wonder if I was imagining things. Maybe being alone that long was messing with my head. I thought about driving into town for a night, but I didn't want to seem paranoid. On the 7th day, I left early and hiked deeper into the woods. I wanted to clear my head. I carried my backpack with water, snacks, and a compass. After walking for about 3 hours, I came across something strange. In the middle of the forest, there was a small clearing with a pile of rocks stacked in a perfect cone shape. It looked deliberate, not like a natural pile or something done by animals. The rocks were too neatly arranged. I walked around it slowly. There were no footprints or signs of people. No trash, no fire pit, no sign of camping gear. Just that stack of rocks. I didn't touch it. I just turned around and started heading back. It was late afternoon by the time I made it back to the cabin. I was exhausted, both physically and mentally. That night, I kept the fire going a little longer. I wanted the place warm and bright. I finally dozed off sometime after midnight. And again, I woke up around 3. This time, the sound was different. It wasn't just rustling. It was a soft thump, like something heavy had stepped on the porch outside. I didn't move. I just listened. The thump came again, and then I heard a creak. The wood on the porch bending under weight. My heart was pounding. I reached for the hatchet and got up slowly. I stood by the door, not sure what I was going to do. I didn't hear anything else after that. Just silence. When morning came, I checked the porch. There was a faint mark near the edge. A slight smudge in the dust like something had dragged across it. Still no tracks on the ground. I decided that was enough. I packed some things and made plans to leave the next day. I had already been there longer than most people could stand, but I had one more night to get through. That last night was the worst. I kept the fire going, all the candles lit, and the hatchet on the table beside me. I didn't even try to sleep. Around 3 again it started. Rustling, then the thump, then the creak of the porch. But this time it didn't stop. I heard another thump, then what sounded like a soft knock on the wall. Not the door, the wall beside the window. I sat frozen. Then came another knock. Not loud, just deliberate. Pause, then another. I wanted to move, but I felt like whatever was out there was waiting for that. Then, slowly, the sound began to move around the cabin. Soft knocks on different walls. Not fast, just one after another with long pauses in between. When the sounds finally stopped, I didn't sleep. I just waited for the sun to rise. When it did, I grabbed my gear, loaded the Jeep, and drove away without looking back. I never found out what it was. No signs of animals. No signs of people. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was broken. But something had been out there, watching, moving, following. When I got back to the city, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I tried telling a few friends, but without details or proof, it sounded like I had just spooked myself. Maybe I had, but I know what I heard. I know what I felt. Months later, I went back online to check if anyone else had rented that cabin. The listing was gone. I looked up the owner's contact details, but the phone number was no longer in service. It was like the whole thing had vanished. I still think about that stack of rocks, about the quiet nights, about the knocks. I haven't gone camping alone since, and I never will again. I never liked crowds. That's probably why I ended up spending most of my vacations alone. I liked the silence. I liked the way the trees didn't talk back, the way the cold wind brushed past me without asking questions. I liked being out there in nature, away from the noise, the people, the endless buzzing of the world. So when I found a small, cheap cabin listed on a remote rental site, I booked it right away. The pictures showed a one-room wooden cabin tucked away in the woods, with a small porch and a tin roof. It looked like the kind of place no one else would want to go. That's what made it perfect. It was deep in the northern Minnesota forest, about an hour from the nearest town. The directions came through an old PDF file. No GPS, no street address, just mile markers and landmarks. I printed the directions, tossed a week's worth of food and supplies in the back of my truck, and hit the road. It was early October. The leaves had turned red and gold, and the air had a dry bite to it. I reached the trailhead around noon, parked the truck behind some overgrown shrubs, and loaded my backpack. From there, it was a 3-mile hike into the forest to reach the cabin. I moved fast through the trail, eager to get there before dark. The trail wasn't marked, but it followed the edge of an old creek bed, and I had the map printed out. The forest was silent. Not quiet, silent. No birds, no rustling, just the crunch of my boots on dead leaves and the creak of the pack straps on my shoulders. I remember thinking it was odd, but I brushed it off. Maybe it was just that time of year. Maybe I was just imagining things. Took me an hour and a half to reach the cabin. It looked just like the photos. Small, worn, a bit saggy around the roof, but standing. A rusted axe leaned against a woodpile beside the porch. A single solar light flickered weakly near the door. There was no lock, just a sliding bolt. Inside, the floor was bare wood, the walls rough logs, the windows tiny and dirty. There was one old iron stove in the corner, a fold-out cot with a thin mattress, and a small table with a single chair. I dropped my pack, sat down, and just listened, still silent. I unpacked slowly, stacking cans of beans and soup on a shelf, setting my flashlight, batteries, and a book on the table. I filled the water jug from the stream about 50 yards away, made a quick sandwich, and sat out on the porch to eat. It was peaceful, but in a strange way, like the whole forest was holding its breath. That first night, I started the stove using the wood left in the pile. The fire hissed and cracked, casting long shadows on the cabin walls. I read a few chapters of my book, turned off the lantern, and lay down. I fell asleep fast, but around 2 or 3 in the morning, I woke up. It was dead quiet. No wind, no crackling fire, just stillness. And then I heard something. Footsteps, not loud, but definitely there, crunching through the leaves just outside the cabin. Slow, steady. I held my breath. I thought maybe it was a deer, maybe an elk, but the steps were too slow, too careful. And then they stopped right outside the window by the cot. I didn't move. After a minute, the footsteps started again, moving toward the back of the cabin, then around the other side. They circled once, then faded into the woods. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I kept the flashlight in my hand under the blanket and stared at the ceiling. In the morning, I went outside. I checked the area around the cabin. Nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing out of place. I convinced myself I was half dreaming. It was cold, I was in a new place, and my brain probably just filled the silence with something that wasn't really there. I spent the day hiking deeper into the woods. I found some deer trails, saw an old collapsed hunting stand, and sat by the creek for a while. When I got back to the cabin, I chopped a little more wood, boiled some water for tea, and tried not to think about the night before. But the next night, it happened again. Same time, around 2 or 3 in the morning. Same sound, slow, careful footsteps outside the cabin. This time, they stopped right by the front door. I lay there, eyes wide open, barely breathing. I couldn't tell how long they stayed. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe more. Then I heard the creak of the porch boards, soft but clear. Something or someone was standing on the porch, just standing. I didn't have cell service, no way to call for help. I stayed completely still, clutching the flashlight. The footsteps finally faded again, retreating into the woods. That morning, I found a single scuff mark on the porch. It looked like a boot scrape, but it could have been mine. I wasn't sure anymore. On the third night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the chair with the flashlight in one hand and the axe from the woodpile in the other. Around the same time, 2:45 a.m., by my watch, the sound started again. This time, it wasn't just footsteps. I heard something tap on the window, not loud, just one short tap, then another, then silence. It didn't make sense. Who would be out here? The closest road was miles away. No one knew I was out here except the owner of the cabin listing. I hadn't told anyone else where I was going. And even if it was some local messing around, why would they keep doing it each night? I stayed inside all day after that. I didn't hike. I barely ate. I just waited. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't bring myself to hike back through the woods. Something about the idea of walking through that forest alone made my skin crawl worse than staying put. I thought maybe I could just wait it out. 3 more nights, then I'd leave. I could handle 3 more nights, but that 4th night was different. The noises started earlier, around midnight. I heard something rustling in the trees behind the cabin. Then, footsteps again. But this time, they came right up to the wall. Then I heard it breathing. Not loud, not deep. Just soft, steady breathing from just outside the wall behind the stove. I held the axe tighter. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would shake the walls. And then something touched the wall. Not a knock, just a soft scrape, like fingers dragging across the logs. I finally snapped. I jumped up, yanked open the door, and shined the flashlight outside. The beam cut through the trees, but there was nothing there. I stepped out onto the porch, holding the axe in one hand and the light in the other. Still nothing. Just trees, the stream in the distance, and the cold wind. I stayed outside for over an hour, walking the perimeter of the cabin, checking the trees, the bushes, the trail. I didn't find anything. No prints, no marks, no sign of life. Eventually, I went back inside and pushed the small table against the door. It didn't feel like enough. That night, I slept on and off, but I didn't hear anything else. The fifth day was overcast, cold, the kind of gray sky that feels like it never fully turns into day. I started packing. I couldn't do it anymore. I needed to leave, even if it meant hiking back in the dark. I stuffed my bag, checked the map, and waited for morning. I wasn't going to risk walking at night, not through that forest. That final night, everything was quiet. Too quiet. No footsteps, no breathing, no taps, just heavy silence. But I didn't relax. If anything, it made me more nervous. I didn't sleep at all. I sat on the cot, watching the door until the sky started to lighten. I left just after sunrise. I moved fast, barely stopping to rest. The forest was still quiet, that same unnatural stillness. I kept my axe in one hand, pack on my back, eyes scanning the trees the whole way. Took me 2.5 hours to get back to the truck. When I finally saw it through the trees, I nearly cried. I climbed in, locked the doors, and just sat there for a long time. I drove straight back to town. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. When I got home, I checked the rental site to leave a review, but the listing was gone. Not marked as unavailable, completely gone. No trace of the host, no record of my booking. I even emailed the company, but they said they had no record of that property ever being listed. To this day, I don't know what happened in that forest. Maybe it was a squatter. Maybe some backwoods guy messing with me for fun. Maybe someone knew I was going to be there and waited. I don't know. And honestly, I don't care anymore. I haven't gone back into the woods since. I don't hike, I don't camp, and I sure as hell don't rent cabins from strange websites. I sleep with my bedroom window locked and a bat under the bed. Because sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I still hear it. That soft scrape against the wall, and the sound of slow footsteps circling the house.